Welcome to Questions We're Afraid to Ask.
All right, welcome back, everyone. We're back with Ashton again today. I'm really excited because I wanted to keep up with you and keep up with all the stuff and I just don't have the time. And so I was like, all right, come back and you just got a data dump on me. I got to find out what's going on here.
Yeah.
So I actually have a question I want to start with because I don't know enough about this because I've been noticing that you've been talking about room temperature superconductivity. And my first question is, okay, what is superconductivity in the first place, and then why do we care? I mean, I understand. I think it's got to be really cold or high.
Well, that's the rub. That's why room temperature superconductivity is so amazing. So I got aware of room temperature superconductivity when LK99 started getting popular over the summer of this 2023. And I also had not really heard of superconductivity in general. Just sounded pretty neat. So you Google it and you find out that it has to do with electrons being able to float freely without any resistance whatsoever in a circuit and a medium. And the thing that's amazing about it is when you just watch what superconductivity can do with respect to, like right now when they super cool it and put it over a magnet and you can actually see it float freely, like skim around.
Yes,
But what they can do then is, so you've probably seen that, and then they'll put it underneath. And then so you'll have the magnet over the top, you'll see it slide, and it's stuck in this position, and it floats and it follows the track like it's a race car track. And the thing that became pretty special when you watch the LK99 stuff that starts to blow your mind is when you watch them have the magnet, and then they put the superconductive material over the top, and it floats. It sticks there. And this is called the Meissner effect, which is that the superconductive pairs within the superconductive material bend the magnetic field around it. And what's happening when those videos is when you watch it, when it's hovering over it, is that some of the element inside there is allowing the magnetism to pass through it, and some of it is bending around it. So what it does is it gets into a position called flux pinning, where it's essentially stuck in the air. And then what you can do is you can take your magnet. So imagine that this is a magnet here, right? And you can move the magnet from the bottom up to the top, and it will stay still hovering, even it's suspended in air, just like that. And that's what we saw from a couple different videos that came out of Korea and China that I still like to post because people say that, oh, LK99 was debunked. And I'm going, well, I'm staring at flux pinning and Meissner effect happening here. And the amazing part is that you don't need liquid nitrogen to cool it, right? So in those videos that we normally see with it, you'll see it very cold because when the temperature drops to a very low temperature, that's what allows for these Cooper pairs to form. And that's when they can, like, the zero resistance begins to happen, where now those electrons are just flowing freely and they're not hitting the atoms or anything else that's within the medium. So the big question then becomes, can we induce superconductivity in room temperature elements, or what other ways can we induce it? And you can tell right away from looking at stuff floating, like your first thought, especially if you're in the UFO community, is like, okay, is this how they're making UFOs float, right? Like this looks like magic, what we're seeing. But I'll go ahead. Do you have a question?
No, I was just going to say this reminds me very much of some of the research that came out of Nazi Germany with a couple of the scientists around like the bell and some of that stuff that, little bits of that where they were able to float certain things and do stuff like that. This sounds familiar about something that came out and then got hushed up and went away and nobody talked about it.
Yeah, and so there's a couple big, huge aspects of it. One thing that I've learned through the course of investigation, digging into the science, is that I don't think that it's hard to think. I think of superconductivity as like in the middle, that the advancements can produce superconductivity, and then superconductivity is a requirement in order to produce the magical effects that we see in general. And I'm using magical in quotes, right? Because magic is just science that we've yet to understand.
Right.
But the things that would really change our reality, like right away, or change our lifestyle, is the fact that you could allow power transfer over long distances with no loss due to heat. And that's what like superconductive wiring would allow us to do, especially with room temperature, where we don't need to cool it down. Because the problem when you have to cool it down is now you're using energy in order to get energy to transfer, right? And when it's room temperature, now we don't have that requirement anymore. Now we can just have superconductive wires with no energy input to them whatsoever. And now we can transfer power thousands of miles without degradation due to heat. I was Googling it. I can't remember what the percentage is, but it's a very significant percentage of energy is lost due to heat and transfer.
I heard this recently too, and it was something like only 30% of the power produced makes it where
Think
it's
about
going.
that. It's like, can you imagine if we could get 70% more power, or even if it's, just like 30% more, like even no matter what it is, that's huge. And then you could allow now where we can be harvesting solar power in California and we can send it to the Midwest, right? It's just hypothetical, or wind power in the Midwest and send it elsewhere. So that's absolutely huge. As well as that one of the other big things is like circuits and things like that would not heat up, because now you imagine like the same mechanism is that if we're not losing anything due to heat, that means now we can create superconductive microchips that don't heat up, right? And so now my phone doesn't heat up anymore. And can you imagine, like, I don't know what percentage of the power loss is due to heat in your phone when you use it, but you can imagine battery life would definitely increase. How much, I'm not exactly sure. Also, it's been argued that computers would become like many times more powerful because you could overclock them a lot higher without them heating up anymore.
And so you could make them a lot smaller because you wouldn't have to worry about space. Yeah.
Power, heat, size, all of those things. Because I think back to some of the heat sinks that we had to put in when I was building computers in the 90s.
Yeah, those things
and
were gigantic.
If you think about like, some of the really high-end ones of like the G5 style computers and that, where they had to put liquid cooling systems in. And then some of the advancements we're seeing with smartphone chips and the redesigning new types of silicon chips and stuff to try and find ways to dissipate heat. But a lot of that is size. I mean, we still have to build heat sinks in. And there's just a lot of waste material that goes into a heat sink, right? Just to make that function.
So the LK99 is experiments that were done to prove room temperature superconductivity? Is that what that is?
Metamaterials. And this was out of Korea and China. They essentially took copper and lead and they heated it up together. It's a very simple process. I mean, I think there's a specific recipe you have to follow in the way you do it. And I think you have to potentially oxidize it or to have it be open to the air at some point. But, the more sophisticated your material science, where you can kind of layer this stuff at the atomic layer, now you're creating a metamaterial that uses other elements that don't have various properties, combining them at the atomic layer, and now you get an element out of it that has unique properties that neither of them had before. Copper and lead, neither of them are magnetic. So now you're getting this superconductive material out of them. Seems kind of odd, right? But this goes to show, and I think even AI recently was producing new elements by kind of mixing elements theoretically the same way that, LK99 can work. And LK99 was debunked, and then there was papers in December that came back, and one of them was talking about using a thin film of the LK99 substance in order to create the superconductive properties that we see. So, I think that there's absolutely, in my opinion, room temperature superconductivity via metamaterials is right on the emergence of it. But what I learned from my interview with Salvatore Pais that I did several months ago was that we may not even need it to induce room temperature superconductivity. It may be able to be done via some electro or electromagnetic effect.
So when you say metamaterial, it's not just copper. What makes it? Is it how it's put together? Like, what makes it a metamaterial?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has to do with the way they cook it. What they do with the recipes, I've watched them do this, is they mix it together, they heat it up in like a little tube, essentially. They put it in the furnace, and I think you're supposed to have it somewhat exposed to air. And then they have the end product comes out like a rock. They break it apart, and then they're looking for little tiny flakes of it that essentially have the right, that we're able to combine in the exact right structure that is the LK99. Now, if you're Korea or you're China doing it at a very expensive lab, as opposed to Joe Schmo just doing it at home, they're going to have a much more refined process.
Right.
And then the idea here probably becomes a matter of getting the atomic layering exactly correct, right? As opposed to putting it in the oven and then just looking for the pieces that potentially have the right properties. Like, you would actually try to do it at the atomic layer and get it a much more refined process, right? And this is the part where just me logically thinking about it before I ever looked into the MH370 stuff, I was sitting there and the West kind of like gave the death knell to it, saying, oh, we couldn't reproduce it. And I'm just going like, well, that's kind of like saying that lasagna is not real because, you weren't able to make a good one. It's like, well, did you follow the recipe right? Did you have the right ingredients? Like, did you follow, et cetera?
I mean, did you try more than once?
See, this gets
exactly.
back to like basic metallurgy. If you don't put the right proportions of like zinc and tin and copper together, you don't get bronze, right?
Yep.
So that's like saying, oh, you can't make bronze because I didn't have the right proportions right.
Yeah.
I mean that.
And then there's the whole aspect of how long you cook it for, what are the ways that you cook it, and so now I think one of the more recent ones, I can't remember what they doped it with, but when they're doping it, they're putting another element in there in general. But either way, like metamaterials are definitely coming, and as I was saying, metamaterials is like layering at the atomic layer, one layer of this, one layer of that. And where this comes into play in UFOlogy as well is this metamaterial that's been out there that I think even is Gary Nolan one of the people, or Linda Moulton Howe, where it's this magnesium, bismuth, zinc, and it's layered in atomic layers of magnesium, bismuth, zinc, like either over and over again. And the bismuth seems to have this very unique, I think it's a diamagnetic property. Scientists out there can correct me if I'm wrong. But I think the just logical implication of the bismuth is that it acts as the barrier, where the outside shell of the craft is now going to be able to kind of go to these superluminal speeds that are required, but then the inside is going to be protected. So it's kind of like creating a electromagnetic bubble around the craft, and that's supposedly what the bismuth is allowed to do. And then I presume the magnesium and the zinc would allow for that electric current to flow, and the bismuth where it could block, in my mind at least. I'm not sure.
So an interesting thing, and I don't know if you watched this. I know Daniel hasn't watched all of them, but I've been watching the Skinwalker Ranch stuff. And one of the episodes in season 4 is titled "Living in a Metamaterial World," because they found stuff that falls under the metamaterial definitions, underground in the mesa that shouldn't have been there. And it's like molecule layer on molecule layer on molecule. And they took it to the university. You're like, where did you find this stuff? And they're like, we drilled into the ground and they're like, what do you mean you drilled into a mesa and you pulled this out? It's like, this is the kind of stuff that we're building for the space program. And, so the idea that this isn't the thing out there, it is. Now the question is, how did that end up under the ground? And that's a different thing. They're out there. They exist, but they don't necessarily occur naturally. Is what I've found. Somebody has to make them, or something has to make them.
The material science that we need, is analogous to, I always put this analogy out there, but the caveman trying to recreate the iPhone, right? There's no chance they would ever be able to do it. And it's the same kind of concept we would have in terms of trying to recreate any advanced technology that's, hundreds, thousands of years beyond our understanding, is that, and we probably are getting close to it now. I would even argue that potentially the military-industrial complex probably has some of this capability. Like, just think about it logically for a second. Why is it China and Korea that are coming out with this LK-99? Why did it not emerge out of the United States or any Western country where we have just the same, if not better, labs that they have, right? And I would say that the answer is probably because it's being suppressed, right? And if you think about what this can do, especially if we look at it in the context of the MH370 videos, you realize really quickly why it needs to be suppressed, right? Because the thing about a unification theory of quantum mechanics, quantum field theory, and general relativity is that it's a Pandora's box. I even clipped Eric Weinstein saying this on the Jesse Michaels podcast. And he's somebody that I think isn't quite at the level of understanding that this stuff's already out there. But once you open it up, that's it. You get everything, right? I often think back to the Stephen Greer space that was held in December on Twitter. And Kim.com is asking him why the aliens don't just give us the cure for cancer. Because it's not how it works, right? It's not like, oh, here's just the cure for cancer. It's like, once you open up quantum mechanics to the macroscopic world, you're getting everything that comes along with it. Maybe there are medical healing technologies related to this. Maybe there are, we can make force fields and we can make cloaking devices and a lot of cool stuff, including green energy, fusion power, potentially free energy, 0-point energy, if you want to think of it like that. But it also leads to stuff like teleporting the 777 and doomsday weapons that would potentially destroy our entire planet. And that's the level where I try to broaden the discourse, because I think that, logically speaking, when I look at the whole UFO community, I look at this disclosure effort that's ongoing out there. That's always where I get to, is that the reason why these people aren't just spilling the beans on everything is because of that logical conclusion, doomsday weapons, right? And it's just not as simple as picking what you want.
My dad has a close friend who worked in MUFON and the government and all that kind of stuff. And at one point he told him, made a comment just like, I know what I need to know, but I'm not going to say, I've made the promises that I won't say anything. And you just go like, man, it's got to be bad. Like,
Yeah, right.
why? What is it? It's just got to be something. I don't remember who I heard it, but it's like, we're either food or we're a lab or we're, like if it
prison planet or
like what, yeah.
Well, and when you talk about the introduction of that kind of change of technology, I think back to, historically what might be something like an analog. And you think about, the people who invented gunpowder as a kind of pretty thing to launch rockets with or whatever, or maybe open up a canal, and everything that has come from gunpowder, right? There's a lot of good and there's a lot of bad, right? But all of those things came from the invention of a new technology, the introduction of a new technology. And any massively changing new technology that comes out like that. Antibiotics, great, awesome. But then there's all the things that come with, well, now we've cured now we've got super bugs that the antibiotics aren't working against. So anytime there's a massive change to the paradigm, there's all the unintended consequences that come with it. And as horrible as the doomsday weapons we can think of, there's the stuff we haven't thought of yet, too.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
Look at nuclear weapons, right? I mean, we had nuclear power come out of nuclear weapons, right? And then, or vice versa, however you want to think of it, and that's the thing. I think that's a good analogy in terms of nuclear energy is actually one of the greenest forms of energy that we have out there. And yet the problem is, well, now you can have technically, we can blow up whole cities with it in a single bomb. Now you look at the quantum unification theories, and these things exponentiate that. If you look at the idea of pulling energy from the vacuum of space-time, potentially being able to amplify energy to the degrees that you can even break the Schwinger limit, this is now where you're talking about stuff where you can blow up the whole planet, or destroy the whole planet, maybe even create a black hole, maybe even create a big bang, So this is the stuff where it goes well beyond what we currently think of as scary into the realms of stuff that we would even see in science fiction. I mean, I really do think that we live in a reality where much of what we see in the show Star Trek is actually, real. It's just a matter of our raising our level of consciousness to understand the nature of our reality, as well as our material science to catch up to the point where we can actually harness some of this stuff.
Yeah.
There's also, because I have a theological background and a philosophy background, there's also an ethical element. Like, are we mature enough to handle this yet? And I've told Daniel this many times, we are one major power outage away from being cavemen again with sticks and acting in small tribal, aggressive ways. And I mean, shoot, we're just seeing that in the politics and everything else that's going on right now. How fast we splinter, how fast we fight. Society is a new thing, right? Civilization is a new thing. Being civilized to each other is a new thing. We have not adapted to that at a physiological level and like a basic brain development level. So, do we really want to give the monkeys the atom bomb and the button, right? Because some monkey's going to press the button just to see what the big red button does. So as much as I would love disclosure, as much as I've been a UFO nut my whole life, I understand why people may be hesitant. And, what can we put out and what can't we put out? If you've never listened to it, there's a famous interview that Art Bell did with John Lear. And John Lear was the son of the guy who made the Learjet. And he was a pilot for CIA for a long time. And it was the last big radio interview he did. You can find it on the internet. It was coast to coast, like 2003 or something like that. And there's like a 10 or 15-minute segment where he goes, all right, Art, you get to decide if we're going to disclose. And then he kind of gives this briefing of all the stuff, and whether it's real or not, nobody knows. But it's fascinating because Art Bell was a big disclosure guy, and he gives out this hypothetical briefing. And at the end of it, Art's like, "No, we don't tell people. We don't tell the public. They can't handle it." and it doesn't even get into all the stuff that you're talking about. So when you present like the whole package of potentially what could be there, even the people who have been begging for it, a lot of them are like, no, maybe not yet, right?
Yeah, that's the big thing, right? I'm glad you bring this up, and I hope you bring this up with other guests that you have on too, because I think that's the way I want to move the conversation. I think that you watch a lot of this stuff, and it's always about the spiritual element of what would aliens existing mean for us from a spiritual perspective. And I'm just looking at it and going, no, I mean, I'm more concerned with if we have their technology, is the dumb monkey going to press the button and just destroy us, right? And this is what I've asked a lot of basically every single person, including Dr. Greer on the space, is what I asked is, can this be turned into a doomsday weapon? And how do we deal with that? Because if so, do we really want disclosure still? And I think that, to me, that's the logical conclusion for why nobody's spilling the beans on it, right? And to your point, I think you're 100% correct on the idea that we have to raise our collective conscious to this point where we are not afraid we're going to destroy ourselves, right? We have to become smarter, better as a society, as people in general, and maybe less aggressive. I'm not sure. I don't really know. But this is the part where it's like, I think that, and this is my announcement that I made a couple of days ago in terms of retiring from the investigation next month in March, is that we're just simply not ready for this kind of technology. That's the conclusion that I've come to over the last 6 months, is that, we would probably destroy ourselves with this technology. And I think that we're not ready for macroscopic phase conjugation and floating orbs, right? Because of that. I think that if it was just the ability to teleport a plane or just the ability to watch something float, right, where we can have Back to the Future hoverboards, I'd say we're ready, right? But it comes with a lot more than that. And that's why I think that a lot of people struggle with the idea of these videos being real. Like I've always said, I think that if the MH370 videos didn't have any orbs or the plane disappearing, right, whatever else was happening in those videos, people wouldn't even fight back. They'd say, oh, we've got video of the plane, right? And I think that's really the block in a lot of people's minds. So for me, I figured a few days ago, the best thing would be to step away from the case for a while, let the science start to catch up, because this is my opinion, I'm 100% sure that this science is real and it will be proven over the course of time. I don't know how long it's going to take, but eventually it'll get out there. I hope I don't die before it comes out. But yeah, and then when that happens, I think that people will look back at these videos and go, wait, it is kind of weird that we never found a plane in the South Indian Ocean. Like, could these actually really have been a spy satellite video and a video of an MQ-1C drone, the last visual that we have of MH370, wherever it went, if it went somewhere?
So I totally hear what you're saying about pushing the button and blowing everything up, because 100%. But I also look at the other side of this and go, like, do I really trust the people who have the button right now?
Question.
I get it that, like, they've had the button, but at the same time, they've also, like, if they really have the button, then why is our power system not better? And why are we not? I mean, like, there's all these. So, like, I hear you that but we haven't pushed the button at this point, and if we're like, so what are we really okay with just letting this conglomerate of mysterious, hooded Illuminati people control this thing still, or should we
well, you ready for it to get really dark here?
Okay,
yes,
go for it.
The Putin interview with Tucker Carlson basically just says that the president doesn't have any real power, and that it's, I'm going to speculate, the CIA or whoever else that's really pulling the strings behind the scenes, right? And if you think of that wording in the context of what we've been discussing here with this technology, it begins to make sense. Is that it's a scenario where you only want one person on the planet to have this technology, and you would do basically anything to prevent any warring factions from having it. Because the moment you have two warring factions, now we're back into the Cold War, right? Where it's like everybody's afraid anyone who's going to do it is going to destroy the whole planet, or that it can leak out. And now you start to realize, like, if you're the person who has the button and you don't want anyone else to get it, would you go to the lengths? Like, would it be morally correct to disappear an entire plane of 239 people in order to prevent that from happening? And that's the part where you start to hit these moral conundrums where it's like, oh boy, like, did we zap this plane to prevent China from getting this technology? It starts to really ring some bells.
Well, I mean,
this is where you get into Spock logic, right? The good of the many outweigh the good of the few or the one, right? And that is a factual statement, but can you as a human being live with that choice? Some people can, some people can't.
So are you proposing in this situation, I guess we're saying that there is essentially a shadow government that is dictating greater policy unbeknownst to everyone else?
I've kind of come to that conclusion. And the weird part is, if you'd asked me 6 months ago, I would have thought, nah, there's no way, right? Like, how would they be able to pull that off? And now, over what I've experienced, what I've learned, I'm sitting here going, man, it really is a deep state, or whatever people call it, the swamp, or shadow government, breakaway civilization, whatever you want. I do think that they're there. And I think that it's way easier to convince people of lies than I thought before. Like,
what do you mean breakaway civilization?
When I talk about breakaway civilization, I mean technology that essentially would change everything, right? And a few people have access to it and know it's real and utilize it. Stuff like over unity. You know, I wouldn't have thought that over unity was a real thing, which is essentially producing more energy, having a higher coefficient of performance than one. So meaning that you're getting more energy out than you're putting in, whether that's measured in heat or whatever it's measured in. That's the idea. It turns out that's real. I mean, I've been looking at the scientific papers myself, and that's essentially similar, if not equivalent, to 0-point energy, the idea that you are sucking energy from the vacuum of space-time.
Now, is that just theoretically true, or is that like
there's peer-reviewed scientific papers now? Like, so one of the ones was I posted from Bob Grenier in Nature just about a month ago, and it's related to the vortex tube generator from Malcolm Bendall's thunderstorm generator. Which explains why they attacked Malcolm Bendall so hard.
Yes, this is what I've been talking about.
Well,
this is what Randall's been talking about this with the plasmoids and that. This is we were just talking about this before.
It's right before.
What you were telling me earlier.
I will, I will. But even putting that aside, there's the papers coming out where they're making the cold fusion work.
Yes.
Even the 0 point, and where they're getting more out than they're putting in.
That
without having to blow up the sun.
About. Yeah, and I think people look at it, and because it's go ahead.
Yeah,
you go.
But it may be similar to that. But I was listening to a podcast called the Micah Hanks Show this morning on the way into work, and from like last week, his episode on the 7th is titled "Plasma, UAP, and the Lifelike Luminous Phenomenon." And there's a couple of papers that are putting out that plasmoids are exhibiting pseudo-lifelike properties, and it might explain some of the UAP stuff. And they don't know why. It's not claiming a why they're doing it. It's just like, we're seeing this plasma do really weird things and move like jellyfish and donuts and move together in formation. And we know we can manipulate plasma a little bit, and they've done some of it at micro scale in the lab, but then they're seeing it happen like from the space station and, all this stuff. They're like, what the hell is going on? This doesn't make sense to us, right?
Yeah.
And it talks about plasmoids as being like proto-life in one of the papers. So it was just fascinating that all kind of ties together with the conversation.
I could see that becoming the next angle for UFOlogy. I'm going to stay very skeptical of those kinds of claims because I think that's also a way where you could cover up this kind of technology being used mechanically by us, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that would, I don't want to throw it out because I'm personally of the belief that there's life everywhere and that we shouldn't be thinking of life in terms of humanoids on our planet because this is just based on where we evolved from and where we live, right?
Yeah.
Everything about us is based on this planet, how we breathe, respirate, everything, right? So if we were to go to some completely different place, let's say like Jupiter, which is a gas giant, right? Could you imagine there might be gaseous-based life that's there that can float and hover as opposed to be on solid ground? I think we have to be thinking way outside the box when we start thinking about life. So I don't rule out the idea of plasma stuff. All I know for sure is that people are taking cold fusion seriously, and cold fusion doesn't mean necessarily cold temperatures. What they're seeing in the thunderstorm generator are high temperatures that are producing more total energy than what is being put into them. And that seems impossible. But the other crazy thing that it's doing that would change everything right away is that it's making it so that in a engine, gas-based engine or petrol-based engine, that it's producing basically zero emissions, like cutting the emissions by like 99%.
And I think it's actually producing more oxygen.
Yes,
it's actually producing oxygen as well.
And then they pump the plasmas back into the engine and makes the engine even more efficient too. So this is like completely wild stuff out there, and people are taking this seriously. I found a news article from 2019 where, like, I think it was Brad Pitt and like Steve Jobs' wife were investing in some of these companies. I mean, it's, and I'm sure there are people, some of these companies are probably taking people for a ride because this is, really fringe science, right?
Yeah.
But it's kind of like the UFO thing where it's like it only takes one time to be right in order to prove the whole thing, right?
Exactly. And shoot, we've seen some of that even with like non-fringe stuff with some of the solar companies and stuff that got all that green money from the government and then never produced a thing where they've been fleeced. But there's another aspect of this, so let us assume for a moment that Tesla was right, and we could draw electricity from the air, and some of the theories about the Great Pyramids were very similar to the Wardenclyffe Tower and all of that. Tesla didn't stop because he wanted to stop. He stopped because the people who were profiting off the other electrical systems, the J.P. Morgans who had the copper mines and were building the stuff and the rubber plants and making the copper wire and building all that stuff that had funded all of Tesla's early work, went, this will put me out of business. And so they blackballed him. And from that point on, Tesla could never. Now, whether he was right or not, we don't know because so many of his papers vanished. But here's this breakthrough guy, and just pure greed shut down potential wireless power.
It's
right?
no different than what Hearst did because of his paper to the hemp. Hemp. I mean, it's the same. We see this all the time.
Same thing.
Yeah,
and I do want
Tesla is probably correct. Oh, do you want to finish your thought? Go ahead.
No, I did finish your thought, and I want to throw something kind of ironic out before I forget. So,
I personally believe that Tesla was probably correct, and the reason why I've come to that conclusion is that toroids do seem to be the answer, and toroids are all basically based off Tesla, which is just a donut-shaped electromagnet, basically. It has to do with the way that it curls the magnetic field kind of back on itself. And we've even seen stuff from like Lieutenant General Stephen Quast, who mentioned the idea of being able to transport any person from any place on the planet anywhere else in under an hour, and wireless power. And it just seems logical. If we got wireless internet, why can't we have wireless power? I'm sure it's different, of course, but
so the kind of the irony there is, from what I've studied and what I've read, if we get the wireless power to work, the Wi-Fi goes away. Because they can't both coexist, right?
We have a corner of the room that's going to be like the wireless power corner, right? You put your devices over in that corner, and then that's where you go if you want to charge them. Like, that's how I imagine it working.
Table. It'll just be like your side table. Like you just set it
on the table and it's charging, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
There's a really neat 5-episode series History Channel did called The Tesla Files, that they brought in Travis Taylor, who's one of the NASA scientists, to test a bunch of Tesla stuff. And he came in with his traditional physics understanding going, this is all BS, like wireless receiver, wireless power. And then they made a bunch of it work. The biggest one being they took the Tesla coil and they hooked something up to an RC, basically an RC boat. And they're running the boat around with no batteries in it. And he's like, this is nuts. And then they went and did the experiment with the lights in the ground. And he's like, this shouldn't, my understanding of physics said this shouldn't work. And it does. And he's just, so I love seeing a mainstream scientist with a high security clearance who works for NASA, a literal rocket scientist in physics or physicist, going, what I just taught was wrong.
Yeah, well, that's the scary part, though, right? Because if they've been hiding it since Tesla, we're talking 100 years, right? So that doesn't give me hope for this stuff coming out within our lifetimes, because you think about what the magnitude of hiding that for that long really is, right? And then it comes down to, like, someone's got to take the hit for covering this up.
I mean, there's so, I mean, just put aside a lot of it. There's how many careers have they buried, and how many bodies have they buried? Like,
And that's
to
what I've
keep
heard
this
behind
under.
the scenes too, is like just the weight and the magnitude of the lawsuits alone for how many people they discredited, maybe even killed, you know, all of that stuff, like would just be trillions of dollars. Like so much money. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, here's what's terrifying. So we're talking about all this, and just look at what came out of MK Ultra, which was just like a drug and psychology experiment the CIA did, and they destroyed so many of the files. And we know they killed people. We know they did illegal experiments on Americans. We know they tortured people. We know they did all this horrible stuff, and we only know a tiny portion of it. And then it was all said and done. Nobody went to jail.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. I don't have any. I mean, I think the only way this comes out is if there certain people get amnesty, so that they can't be sued or whatever, and it would be a huge scandal, right? And even if you look at it that way, the media would crucify everybody, right? Their lives are going to be destroyed no matter what, and to me, that's the logical reason why it doesn't come out. Is a combination of human greed, people not wanting to face the consequences for their actions. As well as what the national security implications, national defense implications are. And as an American, you know, I don't want to hurt my country, you know, but when they disappear a flight full of people and we lie about it and lie to the world about it, like that's the part where I go, man, I also don't want to be in a country where we're doing that either. Because sure, the needs of the many outweigh the few, but like you just destroyed the lives of thousands of people's, you know, 239 people all have how much family, right? You know, the impact gets wider and wider and wider. And I think for me, the bigger thing is this, like, even just today, I walked past a person who was eating out of the trash when I went to take my dog out, right? And I gave him $20. I said, here, get some food, right? And they said nothing to me. And it's not like I got angry at them saying nothing, right? It's just that I realized, like, how long has this person been on the streets? How long have they been living this life where they have to eat out of the trash? I don't blame them for being broken, right? Just broken.
Yeah.
And we can fix that by just revealing this technology. We can fix that. Like, yes, maybe there's a chance where some stupid monkey destroys the planet, but like we just have to take the risk. We're just pushing, we're kicking the can down the road, right? At some point, we're not going to, I don't think our species is going to reach a point where violence and war stops. I just don't think that's ever going to happen. But if we have this technology, maybe people can realize that we need to rally around it in order to prevent our extinction. I mean, I'm an idealist, but who knows?
I see it coming out slowly in dribbles, right? Little things here, where they can be like, we've made a breakthrough. We've made a breakthrough. Or, God forbid, World War III kicks off and, 500 nukes are flying at the United States, and then they're just gone. And we go, don't do it again, right? Assuming we're the ones with the technology. It's to me, it's because it's very much like Desert Storm was for me. Like I'm a child of the '80s. I'm a Gen Xer, and there was what we had pre-Desert Storm that we knew about, and then overnight, hey, all the stealth stuff, right? And we've had it for 15 years or 20 years, and started developing it back in the 60s and the 70s. And oh, by the way, and why did Russia back off and not back Iraq? Because they realized that plane could deliver a nuke to Moscow and they'd never see it coming. Yeah. So all the ballistic missile stuff was pointless at that point, right? And that was the F-117, which is ancient technology when you think about stealth, right? That was first generation stealth stuff.
Yeah, I think so. I see you nailed it. Go ahead.
The irony thing I wanted to throw out, and then we can get back to the serious stuff. We interviewed you on the 13th. We posted our thing on the 14th. And then on the December 20th, Fox ran a retired fisherman claims he found part of Malaysia Airlines MH370 in the South Australian waters. No photos, no nothing. He just said it. And then they put all the pictures up like, look at all these photos. Because at first I showed Daniel it. I was like, look at the photos. And then we dug into it. And it's like, oh, no, those are photos of other planes and stuff. And it was just like, it was funny. It's like, we did this, and boom, hey, they found it. The story can go away again, right? I just thought that was hilarious.
Yeah. Yeah, first thing on the war thing, I think you nailed it, which is like that's probably the way it will come out first, is that it gets used in a war, and then it's unavoidable, right? But that's probably the same reason why we haven't had any major wars, right? We keep having these proxy wars. For at least I've been alive for 40 years, and I've seen nothing but proxy wars and us completely obliterating minor little countries that can't fight back, like Syria and Iraq, Afghanistan, right? And nobody else steps in. Nobody wants to mess around because I imagine the other countries know. China, if I was able to figure this out, China figured this out. If China's working on LK99, Chinese military and intelligence knows about this type of technology, and they're probably trying to catch up, right? And maybe they have caught up in the last 10 years. I'm not sure, but I think that China and Russia know for sure, and they're not messing around because they'll just get orbed, right? I hate to put it that way, but that's what it comes down to. Is if you're one of their leaders, you know that if you try to mess with the United States, you're going to get orbed and you're going to get disappeared, and that's it. And there's nothing you're going to be able to do to stop it. This type of technology is basically unlimited. And so then it becomes a matter of trying to catch up in secret. It becomes this big spy game. And why can't you reveal it? You can't reveal it because no one's going to believe you. If you're China and you come out and say United States orbed MH370, they're going to think it's disinformation. They're going to think it's PSYOP. The CIA will be able to spin it any way that they want. That's one thing I learned from the letter to me. Theory. And we can go to the letter to me in a minute. But to your point about these news articles that all came out, I even made like a video clip, a short video clip about, there was like 6 of them since we started this case of, this person knows where the plane is. This person knows where the plane is. This person knows where, and it's like kind of like religion where like they can't all be right. Only one of them can potentially be, and that's not a very fair comparison, but in this case it does apply where it's like not all of them can know where the plane is. And I think the reality is none of them are correct. The fisherman did not pull up a 100-foot long wing of a 777. That's how big each wing is, 100 feet long. He didn't pull that up in a net. He's like the last sole survivor of this fishing trip from 9 years ago. He has no pictures or anything, and for some reason, all the world's media are reporting on him. Like, to me, this just goes to show how absurd and controlled the media is. That they're taking the word of a guy with no pictures, no evidence whatsoever, that just has like a barroom story. And they're blasting it on all the media, all the TV, everything I could see out there, all the bots I see on Twitter posting it. And I'm just going, wow. I'm sitting out here saying I've got 2 videos. I've got evidence, including 19 witnesses corroborating a fire event of 487 pounds of lithium-ion batteries that started on fire. And it's like, this is so much more credible than some random bar guy, but you don't get any media attention whatsoever.
This is what blows me away. They have the perfect cover story. It was carrying batteries. It flew out over the ocean. It blew up. We never found it.
Yeah, well, even that, the problem with any type of shoot-down narrative is that it's even less plausible than the crash, because in the crash narrative, they try to play it off like, well, all the debris just sank, right? But in the shoot-down narrative, the debris field's going to be even wider. Like the debris field from a shoot down where the plane shot down at 35,000 feet or whatever, it's going to be hundreds of miles. Like it's going to be literally impossible not to see. You would have had random boaters picking up pieces of debris all over the place, right? And none of that ever happened. And that's the thing about all the shoot down narratives. Otherwise I'd be all in on the shoot down narrative stuff too. I mean, the reality is, man, I wish there was a more plausible explanation. But that's the big rub. And so I even talked to these experts and it's crazy. It's like the Ash conformity experiment where people are looking at 3 lines that are different sizes, and they do this experiment where they put them in a room, and then they start to have like the first, all the people are in on it except for one person, and they're kind of at the end. And so they have the first 3 people just lie and say that it's like the wrong line. And what does the person who's not in on it do? They just start conforming. Even though they look and can see that it's not the same size, they'll still say, just to conform with the other people, that it is the line, like some huge percentage of the time. Like I think 30 to 50%, right? And this goes to show, like, even these experts, they will go, I'm going to ignore the fact that debris of a 777 doesn't sink. It's going to float. There's going to be debris everywhere. They just ignore that because they were told, oh, well, this company Inmarsat says there were some pings and it was South Indian Ocean. And so therefore they just go with that narrative. And that's how our reality works.
Yeah. I want to jump back to something about the LK99 that I was thinking about. You mentioned that it being put in a thin film. And that made me think of 2 different things. One was the film they found at Roswell, that material, that real thin material. And then I don't know if you've read D.W. Pasulka's books on UFOs.
Diana Pasulka, she was on Rogan, right?
Yeah,
I
she was
haven't
on
read them,
Rogan.
but
She was
I'm vaguely
on
familiar.
Friedman as well. She mentions this frog skin material that when she got taken to a place and she talks about that same thing about this material that was real thin that you could sort of smush up and it would spring back. And I'm wondering if it's something that's what they're, maybe there is this thin layer around all these crafts and that's what they were finding is that.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, the whole thin film thing is pretty almost brand new to me right now. I remember when I read the LK99 follow-up papers in December, the ones that kind of brought it back into the limelight.
Mm-hmm.
They were based on this idea of it being a film. And I thought that was interesting. I just didn't really put two and two together. But then I want to say a couple of weeks ago, somebody sent me something else about graphite, which is, I think, the same graphite used in pencils. I could be wrong. Maybe that's graphene. I'm still not great when it comes to something.
Graphite is pencils. Graphene, I think, is that like the really strong that they can make structures out of.
Yeah, so I think it's graphite.
Yeah, it's
could be wrong, but then I think that the secret there was also it being like a thin layer as well. And so then just today, right before this podcast, one of my buddies, Dave Rossi, had posted a relatively unknown paper from 1967 from the Soviet era, where they were talking about taking aluminum and creating a film and oxidizing it. And that they created this thin film was also potentially had superconductive properties. So now I'm sitting here wondering if there is not something to that. To your point, I don't really know. Like, I'm not sure when it comes to the Roswell stuff. I've heard those stories of it, like contracting and coming back or whatever. Honestly, not sure. My opinion on Roswell is that it probably did happen, but it was so long ago, it's hard to trust anything that you know or see. And when I look at the pictures that they showed, the famous picture, it looks like they just whipped out some aluminum to like distract people from whatever they really found or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think it comes down to the metamaterial in general and the metamaterial science, right? Like when we're talking about the bismuth layers, like if we're dealing with a civilization that may be out there that is thousands of more years or tens of thousands of more years advanced than us, their material science would be to a level where they can, from an atomic layer, create materials and metamaterials, right? And some of those metamaterials may even have properties that we're blissfully unaware of at this point, right? Because we're the cavemen sitting here thinking about, ooh, stone very hard, right? And we're not thinking about like, okay, well, you can mix this together with this other element, and now you have this whole unique properties that are essentially like magic, right?
It makes me, and this is totally different, but it makes me think about some of the theories that are going on in Egypt right now with we put these two different types of stones together and we can get electricity to do interesting things through it. I just sort of was like, well, we started layering stones and then we started layering metals and maybe there was some, you work your way up to that. So I don't know.
Yeah, the Egypt stuff's interesting. I'm actually a believer of the piezoelectric power generator theory of the pyramid. And that's mostly because when I looked at the pyramid and they showed the inside of it, I look at that and I go, that's not a tomb. That doesn't make any sense to be a tomb. Why are there tunnels going up like this and that and what have you? It's like, if it was just a tomb, you're just going to be going in straight, right? And you're going to have a tomb in there. It's not going to be all these weird angled structures and cavities that they have set up in general. And you find out that there is this piezoelectric effect. And if you look into piezoelectricity, it's the same thing it's like quartz, which when you shake it or you squeeze it, creates electricity. Same way that some people's watches work, right? When you shake the watch and it produces electricity.
You talk about the shadow government doing things, and Egypt is the perfect example of a non-shadow government. The bulk of their economy is based on tourism around the theories that the early English came up with, explorers came up with about the history of the Egyptians, and these were tombs and all this stuff, even though none of the pyramids match any of the tombs that have ever been found, and they don't have any of the carvings and any of the hieroglyphs, but their entire economy is built around that tourist stuff. And so anyone who challenges anything like that, or whatever the standard narrative is, doesn't get to do exploration in Egypt, and they end up getting banned from all the different sites, regardless of the data that's found, because they can't afford for that to change.
Yeah, and I think that there's another layer, just kind of going to the Egypt topic, but I think that a lot of this anti-gravitational technology, you might even be able to use sound waves to create some type of levitation effect as well. It does get branched into the stuff where it's, fringe science for sure. But, then you also balance that with how we're people moving around 20,000 pound stone bricks, right? Like, I don't care how many slaves you've got, right? You're not pushing this thing up a hill. Like, just these basic physics will tell you this is not going to work out very well for you.
So it gets really interesting, and I've talked about this before, but there's another Uncharted X, Ben Van Kerkwyk, has a channel, and he's been working with some guys doing metrology, and they've pulled out a lot of these ancient vases that were, they're buried and pulled up, they're thousands of years old, and they're made out of stone, things like 8s and 9s on the Mohs scale. They run them through structured light scanners, and they're perfect. They're perfectly circle and perfectly flat and perfectly 90 degrees, and there's math in them in the way that they're all structured, and you look at that and go, okay, all right, you need a computer to make this. You need something more complicated than we're attributing to anyone in our past, which means we've made a wild error somewhere, and we need to reset our whole notion of what we're talking about. Because I think there's really something to the idea of these things that we're interacting with have always been here. And, for thousands and hundreds of thousands of years, they've always been around, and we're just still trying to work out, or maybe we did know what they were and we forgot and we're working at it again. But it seems like they've been around always.
Yeah, someone was showing me something about that same vase and the shape of it and scanning it, and I didn't really understand what it was all down. But I think that the idea that we could have humans before us, even thousands of years, could have unlocked some of this technology is not that unfathomable. It's easy for us to think of technology as this linear progression, but I think that it's more of a branching progression, right? And you could understand how quantum and macro interact just simply from observing the properties of producing something like resonance and sound, for example. If you look at oh boy, what's the name of it right now? For some reason it's eluding me, but being able to create these shapes with sound and sand and stuff like that, and
I know
anybody could have figured that out. I don't know why I can't think of it. People who are listening are
certain frequencies and stuff produce certain shapes,
different patterns
every time. Yeah.
And so it's like stuff like that. You can imagine we could have figured that out, but maybe we didn't have the material science in order to produce, very powerful metamaterials. But you might be able to still figure out some of that stuff in general.
The other thing to think about is generally when advanced civilizations collapse, the only thing left is the rock and the stone. There we go. Right?
Okay.
So there's nothing to say that we haven't developed, advanced, and ended up in the Stone Age again multiple times. Just go back to what Einstein said. He goes, I can't tell you what weapons World War III will be fought with, but World War IV will be fought with stones and clubs, right? Because we'll knock each other back into the Stone Age again.
Smart.
Einstein
was really
had
smart.
a lot
I
of
love
good
it.
ideas.
And of course, they thought he was crazy back then. Right now, we revere him as a genius and the inventor of modern physics, and as we think of it. The other thing that I would have you guys look into, if you're curious into a lot of this stuff, and your listeners as well, is sonoluminescence, star in a jar, which is that you can produce these cavitation bubbles, and this is also essentially, it's all linked as well to the thunderstorm generator and the vortex generator, is that you can basically produce a little miniature star inside of water. And I think they use sound waves in order to do it as well, and you can create this little star in there, and in the middle of it, it looks like a literal star. And they have speculated that there might even be like fusion happening in there, and the temperatures might be reaching such a high temperature that it matches what we see from very large things. And the reason why this is interesting is twofold. One is that it's like we can maybe even produce little mini fusion reactions. Your mind thinks of it like that, but also your mind thinks, well, what is the difference between something that's really large and really small, right? Is there really much of a difference? Or what if there's no difference? It's just our understanding, our perception of it. And that's what leads people to thinking about unification theories and quantum mechanics and general relativity.
And then you end up with 12 dimensions and nothing that we actually see is reality. And, it gets...
I don't know how many dimensions there are. It's funny because I asked the question. I didn't know what kind of responses I would get. I just said, how many dimensions are there in our universe? And I got every answer you could possibly think of. None, 1, 3, 4, 5, up to some people saying 11 or 12.
Yeah.
It's definitely one of those things where who knows.
I think that's Eric Weinstein has got his theory out of, I can't remember what he's got a sort of a grand unification theory. And I think he's got 11, it's like 4 physical dimensions and 11 energy. I forget exactly how he breaks it down, but he puts a pretty solid number based on the math that he's come up with. It's interesting. But yeah. But then you're also talking about like the things that we see aren't really there because they're, you start to get into that weird perception of is reality what we're perceiving of it if it's not really there unless you see it. It gets a little weird.
Yeah. And to loop it back, I mean, I think that you guys wanted to know a little bit more about the MH370 updates and case. I would say that the major update related to the case, when was the last time we spoke, by the way?
It was 13th, I think. December 13th.
December. It's been so
it's been a couple months, actually. So probably the biggest thing that happened there's still been nobody stepped forward as the hoaxer. I mean, several people tried to troll and pretend to be the hoaxer, but none of them came to me directly. They didn't have any evidence, and you look through their history, you can tell right away that they're just trolling, unfortunately. But so no hoaxer ever came forward with any evidence about having created the videos or anything like that they would have had. But the big thing I think recently was finding out that the raw data for the telemetry, which is the satellite data, there was a 47-page report, came out on May 28th, 2014. Well, why is this date important? Is that the satellite video was published May 19th, 2014, which is 9 days before that ever came out. So how did this supposed hoaxer know what coordinates to put in the bottom left of the satellite video that indicate the real location in the Nicobar Islands, where that raw data correlates with KT's sighting, and this is the exact location where the plane supposedly turned into the South Indian Ocean? That data was not. The raw data was not publicly available. So were they one of like the early investigators that were, and I looked at the independent group was formed like after this as well, I think in early April. So it's like, who was this person? Was this some person who was following the case super closely that somehow like guessed the right location? Like now we've got to add so many illogical elements. Like the person has to have precognition. And for the people that were alive back then that were adults, and followed along in that case, that there was so much confusion. Nobody had any idea where the plane was. A lot of people were still thinking the plane was in the South China Sea or Vietnam, which is over to the east around this time. It wasn't until months later that people were like, okay, it definitely went in the South Indian Ocean, right? They developed some narratives around it, but normal people were sitting there going like, wait, what? How does this make sense? Like you guys said the plane went dark over the South China Sea, but now you're saying South Indian Ocean? Like, so a lot of that doesn't make any sense. Plus the idea too that so much of the information was not public available information in 2014, like how satellites even worked. Even the idea of making a satellite video would have been completely illogical in 2014.
And to make a pair. That's what's so weird about it.
Yeah,
like
2 videos.
If you're gonna fake a satellite video, you make one. You don't make a parallaxed pair of them. That's just extra work you don't need. Like,
yeah, and I think so on that front, I think debunkers have presented a pretty plausible case. They haven't proven it, but they presented a plausible case for that the YouTube could have uploaded it as parallax. But the thing about that too is what would be the difference between it getting converted to 3D versus actually originating as 3D? Like I think that they would be indistinguishable of one another, right? But they did show that YouTube had some functionality like that, and that there were a couple videos that people made that look similar to that. So I'm not sure. But if it is 3D, we do have the satellites that were literally there. USA 229 is sitting there staring down at the plane's location at 1840 UTC. But I think the real thing, though, is that what we're looking at here, a lot of people wonder about the clouds. Why aren't the clouds moving? Blah, blah, blah. Well, this is a computer program. This I'm 100% sure about. It's speculative, but I'm sure, absolutely sure, is that the satellites do not work by looking through the satellite. That's old school. That's 1970s type stuff. That's not how it works anymore. We are looking at a computer program. Like I can pull up, the idea would be I could pull up the satellites right here in front of me on my computer, and it's going to be presenting me like a Google Earth. And I'm looking at the Google Earth, and I'm picking what time and location that I want to go to. I punch that in, and now I'm looking at a video playback. Now it probably doesn't have video, like perfect video playback of everywhere, but it has probably video playback of the various locations where we have like the low Earth orbit satellites are around them. And it's creating a model, right? So it can use just the scans, like large wide field scans, to recreate the video aspect of it. And that's what's like kind of magical about it. And the reason why this would be the case is because low Earth orbit satellites move too fast, right? And we know we have them, a lot of them. And they're moving 16,000 miles an hour. So you're not going to use those to look through at a specific location optically. Maybe you can, but that would not make a lot of sense. We know the Cyber system as well. We found even more data about the Cyber system. So the Cyber system is scanning the entire world every 10 seconds. Okay. And then they have these stairs on them as well, where they can then take a focus point if they want to, like a smaller square.
Pull in.
And they can go even higher potential resolution capabilities. And it seems like it's all based in infrared. And then the nice thing about the infrared is then you can manipulate it to show whatever you want. False color infrared. You might even be able to put thermal onto it as well. But most of this stuff from these satellites is about tracking, right? Tracking missiles, tracking planes, tracking objects. And then I think this has probably already happened if they're reporting on it now. But there was a video from the Wall Street Journal just like a couple of weeks ago where they talked about the Cyber system. And there's a guy at the end who seems like just a random guy, not even like military or anything, talking about integrating the mid-Earth and low-Earth orbit satellites into the Cyber program as well, which is what I had been sitting here talking about for the last 5 months, is how USA 229, low-Earth orbit satellite, potentially be part of the Cyber system. It probably was 10 years ago as well. And they just use computer programs for it. So this is why you don't see the clouds, moving super speed or the satellite moving. We do see the clouds moving, but they're only moving at very they're tinily moving, and because you're only looking at each perspective for a few seconds, as well as the distance of the satellite pulling the scans could be anything from 1,100 kilometers to 40,000 kilometers, depending on if it's using the data from the geostationary satellites or the ones from low Earth orbit. So you're not going to see much movement. I mean, just you look outside
and
at
sometimes
the clouds they don't
aren't moving. Yeah,
and sometimes they're just not moving very fast. So I imagine if we looked at these, if the video didn't have the perspective changes, I imagine the cloud movement would be much more apparent.
Well, it sounds like, I mean, if you're talking about the split video and the 3D, like if a 3D file was loaded that would make it split it, then doesn't that even make it? That's an even more complicated file to make in the first place. Like, if you're loading in the 3D file, that would be hard to get it to accidentally split it. Like, that seems like that's harder.
I think that's why they had to come up with this idea that, YouTube did it, because if not, there's nobody's out there faking a 3D video, right? It's not happening. It's never. As far as I know, it's never happened. And this is where like the debunkers, they don't use their own level of skepticism and standards for their own claims, right? The way that this plays out, and this is the big problem with the skeptic community in general, is that in order to prove something, you have a little insurmountable hurdle, right? I've got 14 pages of evidence that go through the whole story, start to finish, of what happened, right? Including the motives, the fire scenario, proving that it's a lie, the official narrative is a lie, that you can't have a plane crash without leaving a debris field. They don't just hit the water and then sink into the water. It doesn't do any of that, right? And the skeptic side ignores all of it. They ignore all of it. They never address any of it. And then they go, well, I'm going to look for one thing that will present plausible deniability or any level of doubt, and then I'm going to claim that that's true, and that negates everything that you put out there, right? And this is the problem, because that's not science. That's not what science is, right? I think the skeptics themselves have turned themselves into a literal cult. And this sounds harsh, but it's true. And if there are skeptics out there listening, you need to escape from your cult. You're in a cult. You're not performing science. Far from it. People like Mick West are literal cult leaders of the 21st century. He builds this cult of personality around him where everybody wants to know what Mick West thinks about whatever thing that's out there, right? And science is the scientific method. It's coming up with a hypothesis, coming up with a story, looking at the evidence to build that story. What the skeptics should be required to do is to develop an entire story the same way that somebody who's trying to prove it does. There should be the same levels of evidentiary standards for both sides. Is that if I'm out here going, here's the whole story of what this happened, the skeptics shouldn't go, oh, well, I was arguing with somebody in my Discord actually earlier because we were talking about Edward C. Lynn and how we had proven that his lawyer says that the case against him began on April 2nd, 2014. This is 3 weeks after the plane disappeared. That's when the case against him begins. He's the guy that leaked the videos. I'm 100% sure he's the guy, right? I've got the guy who leaked the videos. And they're like, oh, well, no, I found this case study that doesn't have any quotes in it whatsoever that claims that they were looking into him in February or early 2014. And this somehow negates that. Like, this is not how any of this stuff works. Like, if you believe the videos are fake, then your story begins with Regicide Anon being in on it. Because if he's not in on it, why does he say received March 12th, 2014 in the description of the video? And they're like, well, I don't have to explain that. Well, obviously, it's one of two things. Either that person's lying, and then you're implicating them in the development of these videos. And the reason why they don't want to do that is because then it opens them up to scrutiny. Because now if we can prove that Regicide was not involved in it, then it shows that it must be true, right? That's why they don't want to address those claims or make that kind of story. But if Regicide's not involved in it, right, and that date is correct, then these videos are automatically de facto true. 4 days, there wasn't even a narrative of the South Indian Ocean. They were still looking in the South China Sea 4 days afterwards. Yeah. So there's no way that you could explain the coordinates.
I think the other piece to that I keep coming at, and sort of when I first saw some of the stuff that you were talking, I was just sort of like, well, what's the point? Like, what's the objective behind faking this? Like, I can't see like, I'm gonna make a fake video to implicate somebody else, and like, it's not like I went on vacation and I saw a UFO and I took a video, and people take those and sometimes they're real and sometimes they're fake, but it's just like, this is so poignant, it's so specific, it's this plane, it's the right situation. Like, how do you come up with that on your own, out of the blue, completely
That's the other thing the
fabricated
skeptics
from
don't
nothing?
come up with, right? Like they don't ever come up with any story about that, and that's part of the reason too. It's like, we've got a whole story that's implicating these 20 free-scale semiconductor scientists in the motive, right, and potential espionage scenario.
Yeah,
and the skeptics just go, well, and I hate to call out Tim Pool because I think he was really nice. He could have been a lot harsher and meaner during our interview, but he talks about, it was a Bitcoin billionaire. Like, dude, it's just nonsense. There's no Bitcoin billionaire made these videos. 0% chance. That's more absurd than the plane crashing into the ocean from a suicidal pilot after flying for 8 hours or whatever, right? Like, no Bitcoin billionaire made these. I'm going to go ahead and throw that out. No, they can't be created in 5 minutes or an hour or even 5 hours. Just creating the storyboard alone would take hours just for this. This is not a situation where somebody copied an existing work, right? This is everything in here is completely, it's all completely original stuff, including the idea that we've got superconductive harmonic orbs that have gravity engines pulling them forward, right? Like, where does that even come from?
Yeah.
So I think that, the only people in my mind, if I'm being skeptical of my own opinions here, is this would have to be related to a foreign intelligence or the United States government developing these. These would be the only people that would have the resources and the knowledge about what to make it look like, what to do, how to implicate it. But that doesn't make any sense either from the investigation, because China hacks Malaysian government the next day. They release these weird satellite images 5 days later. So that basically says that China was not implicated in this. They're trying to figure out what happened to it. It was their people on board the plane, right? They want to know, where'd this plane go? And they know it didn't crash in the South China Sea or South Indian Ocean, right? And they're sitting there trying to figure out, you can imagine this cat and mouse game between intelligence communities where they've all got satellites in the sky. They're all looking for a debris field. There isn't one anywhere. And then they're going, well, why is no one being honest about what they know, right? And then China's gotten skeptical as hell, thinking, what happened here? So sad as it is to say, United States government stealing this plane is by far the most plausible. They're the ones filming it with both these assets are American assets. And I'm not sure that China or Russia even have the capability to pull this off. It seems like the United States is the one, right?
So you have to ask a question. Would the U.S. government at some level be willing to disappear an entire airplane and everyone on board? And when we look at everything our government has ever done, or organs of our government have done, The answer to that question, whether they did it this time or not, is absolutely if they thought there was an advantage to it. Absolutely. They would. We have toppled governments. We have destroyed countries. We have assassinated people. We have destroyed reputations. We have destroyed lives. We've driven people insane, right? All these things have been, we hid Nazi scientists who did horrible things for our own benefit after the war. So are we capable of this? As much as I love my country, and I think it's probably the best one in the world at this point, you know, I kind of fall under that Churchill thing of, you know, democracy is the worst form of government except for all the other ones. You know, it's this may be the best we have right now. It doesn't mean we can't get better. But would they disappear a plane to stop one person from getting a piece of information we didn't want to get to a potential enemy peer? Yes. Yes, we would. No question, without blinking an eye. Yeah. There are people who work in the government who would do that. And I can tell you a story about that offline. It's not one I'm going to put online.
But I mean,
if you're interested.
You know, it used to be a terrorist captures a plane and you know, or something. And I'm wondering if it was just one of those things where it was super last minute. And the only thing that I find strange about it is the fire. Like, if they're defecting, how is it just bad luck?
So you guys, if you haven't, I'm guessing you haven't checked out the Diego Garcia whistleblower, a letter to Ashton Forbes on YouTube. You should probably listen to it.
Okay,
probably need to listen to it. So check that out later. It's 11 minutes long. You will not be disappointed. It's probably better than any TV show or movie plot that I've ever heard. It creeped me the hell out when the first listened to it. I listened to it 40 times probably.
Diego Garcia was the location that was speculated that it may have gone to, right?
Yeah. And so first thing I want to say is that one thing I've learned here for the people that are listening is that the world is not black and white. We're not the good guys and Russia's not the bad guys, or, you know, whatever you want to play it out, right? We have the same level of propaganda happening in our country that those countries have happening. We probably do the same sketchy stuff to political opponents and people that threaten us that they do to theirs. And we have to stop thinking about the world in terms of they're the good guys or they're the bad guys and we're the good guys. Absolutely. That's a very key aspect to the investigation in general. I had never even been promoting the espionage scenario after probably like the Confessionals podcast, where I said I wasn't sure if this was an espionage type event or if this was some type of UFO, non-human intelligence type event. And then it wasn't until the fire scenario came up that I said, I'm going to throw that all out. This is definitely us. If there's a fire, now you think of it as like a rescue motive, right? You're trying to prevent your technology. And I had been saying that for months. And then this letter comes out. I think it was around January 9th or 10th. And on this brand new YouTube channel, it's got this super highly produced AI voice that sounds like a real human being, but it's definitely an AI voice, very high quality one. And an 11-minute long letter. And it's sandwiched between videos of much more questionable validity on either side, you know, these stories of the Miami aliens. And then it also talks about the New York tunnels and the Chan Thomas, Adam and Eve story and the glitter conspiracy. But in the middle, there's one that literally says, Diego Garcia whistleblower, a letter to Ashton Forbes, like just to me. And I listened to it and it presents the whole scenario that it was espionage from the beginning. That the United States knew that these people were defecting. There's 8 Chinese nationals of the 20 Freescale semiconductor scientists. Supposedly they were defecting to China and that they were taking the technology with them and that China had some leverage over them and that the United States knew since December, 3 months before the plane went missing, and that they planned this whole thing out and that they loaded the plane with the lithium-ion batteries. The weird part about this is this brings in a lot of evidence that I had been dismissing and some that I'd never even reported on, which was that 2 Navy SEALs died under very mysterious circumstances that were, according to the Russian intelligence report that's out there, they had kind of been linked to disinformation, but nobody really knew. That supposedly, like these, whatever cargo was on the Alabama Maersk, where these people both supposedly died of overdoses at the exact same time, made its way onto MH370. And supposedly Russia was following and tracking the plane, and that China was tracking it, and that the United States government did this to just show China who's your daddy. Like, hey, we know what you're trying to pull here, and that they had the lithium-ion batteries have a predictable burn rate, that they knew this would happen, so that the fire was essentially to forcibly divert the plane as a kind of a distraction, and then they orbed the plane right in front of them, supposedly. And then it says, remember those satellite pictures I was talking about that China posted? It says that was China basically just acquiescing and saying, yeah, we give up. Like, we know you did it and we give up. And I just thought about that and went, holy shit, that's creepy, because I think I'm the only person on the planet that had speculated that those satellite pictures might be some form of spycraft, right? Because they say, oh, it was debris in the South China Sea, but there's no proof that those images were even of the South China Sea, right? That's just how it's reported on.
They almost, when you look at them, you can almost see the three orbs in the picture. I
think you can see it, like,
if you know what it is, like if you're like,
you got to listen to the thing, man, because it says it even says if you know what you're looking at, then like you know what you're seeing in the pictures, right?
Yeah.
And it's weird too, because the clouds are also cumulus clouds in those pictures. Mm-hmm. You can tell pretty clearly they're low altitude clouds, like similar to what you see in the satellite video. I even tried to go side by side in a post and like try to compare it to see, like, but the problem is you don't know the angle the satellite's taking in that satellite picture, right? So you really have no idea how to line it up correctly. But they do look like the same kind of clouds. So it's super, super weird, man. And there's some details in there that I've never reported on. Like, they even time when they supposedly received the plane to be in, I think, 1856 UTC, which is 13 minutes after. They also say when the plane disappeared. They say the plane disappears at 1843 UTC, but I had been saying 1840 UTC was the time that we had pegged it based on the witness.
Right.
1843 is the time of the Chinese Mayday call, only reported in Chinese news. That was when China intercepted this communication from Taiwanese, or I keep saying Taiwanese, but Thailand embassy, that the plane was disintegrating and attempting emergency landing. So did somebody make this video and use that as the time for receiving it? Like, it's super weird. A lot of details in there. And early on, I thought, okay, this has got to be some kind of like super fan that's like stalking me, that also happens to know about Malcolm Bendall and Randall Carlson, because near the end, it gives me this hint that like some gray bearded man went on Joe Rogan and he might be the key, and he's talking about sacred geometry. Does that remind you of anything? And right away, all my followers were like, dude, that's Randall Carlson he's talking about. And I had no idea who Randall Carlson even was.
Oh, okay.
And then he's talking about this guy that was in the Maldives on a different island, and how he was creating some rudimentary form of the technology. And Malcolm Bendall's been living in the Maldives for the last 7 years on some island somewhere. And I'm sitting here going, and turns out Bob Greenier, who I had on my Hard Truths podcast, he was like the person that made the Fractal Toroidal Moments video before I even had met him. He was like doing a review of the MH370 videos in my case. He was hanging out with Malcolm Bendall when that video came out. And so I get in touch with them and I'm like, dude, can you have Malcolm look at this video? Because this is super weird, man. And I find out he's talking to him. I'm just like, it's such a small world. But the website just went dark. The YouTube channel went dark. Like, if you look at it, I don't think there's been a new video for like almost a month. And that's just super weird to me, because if I am some type of actual whistleblower, or if I'm a foreign intelligence, whatever, and I'm trying to give you information, that's a really good way to do it, is to put out a YouTube channel and you sandwich it with a bunch of other stuff that's not relevant, right? And then you just go dark with it. And now this is kind of like sending an encrypted communication anonymously to somebody who you don't have their phone number, right?
Yeah.
So the more the time goes by and I look at that, I think, man, like, could that really have been either a foreign intelligence trying to send me a message about what happened to it, or really a real whistleblower? I'm not sure, but I would say everybody out there that wants to listen, go check it out. Weirdest thing that's ever happened to me in my life by far. And for the people that may think, oh, well, Ashton created this, right? I guarantee you I did not. I would have no idea how to even begin making something like it. The only thing that's weird that people will point out is, well, why does it say deflector several times instead of defector? And it was clear that the person that made the video was watching the case, because then they put in one of the later, like the next video, the first like minute actually addresses that and says like how they created it. Is supposedly they converted it from another language, the letter. So I don't really get it. Like they claim they use Google Translate and Grammarly, but I think the way you listen to it, if you listen to it as many times as I've listened to it, which is too many, you realize that it's got to be some kind of voice modulator or translator or whatever. Like, sure, maybe they translate it to English and then they're reading it, but feels like there's, if I had to guess, based on the grammar, it's someone from Asia. Because I lived in Singapore for a while, and they have this common thing, and when they speak English, where they get like possessive stuff, grammar incorrect, or let's say have instead of has, or they don't use the in certain places and stuff like that. And the letter does that a lot, several times as well. So it's very bizarre, man. So it makes me wonder if like somebody was speaking in English, but they're not a native English speaker, and they were speaking into an AI voice changer, and the AI voice changer basically changed defector into deflector because of their accent.
Their accent,
you know?
Yeah.
And then they didn't, spot check it or whatever, right? So maybe they weren't even a native English speaker. Like I don't know. I would imagine that the person that sent that, though, English is not their first language.
I will definitely have to check it out. Yeah,
and it's actually, it actually got me thinking that the espionage scenario makes more sense, actually, to the point, based on everything that we talked about here and during this podcast as well. The idea of like, would the government disappear it? What would the motive be? Why would there even be batteries? I thought it was too convoluted. That like, oh, you've got this battery fire. That's why I had ruled out the espionage scenario. I thought you would just orb the plane over the South China Sea, but maybe that's too close to China. Maybe you need it to fly over towards the Andaman Sea, where you've got your Cope Tiger and Cobra Gold exercises going on. We have all your most advanced equipment, according to this guy named Matthias Chang. And, that's where all these assets would have been set up. Maybe that's where the orbs are ready to go, the drone, everything, right? And so it's a matter of, this is definitely an operation in my mind, no doubt.
It's absolutely fascinating updates, and I thought I heard you say through in the beginning that you're planning on kind of retiring the investigation and kind of wrapping things up. Do you have a new topic you're planning on digging into, or are you going to just go back to like normal life for a little while, or do you have something else you want to dig in?
Probably a little bit of both, honestly. I'm not really sure. Like, the one thing that I've always wanted to expose is NASA, and I think I've got a couple things that'd be pretty controversial that I could talk about related to NASA. But I think the bigger thing for me is like wanting to figure out the technology. I've been teaching myself electrical engineering, which anybody who's out there, two things I would say. First of all, if you want your children to get into science, have them get into electrical engineering. That's the one. That's the science you want them to be in. The other thing is that anybody else who's out there that thinks that they are too dumb or too old or whatever, you're wrong. You're not. You can figure it out yourself. I guarantee it. If I can figure it out, you just start small and work your way up. Start with the basics. The thing about the videos that's amazing is that we've got the cheat sheet. We've got the answers, right? So now you can look at the science that's out there and you can figure out, okay, how is this happening, right? And you can build your way up to it. So that's kind of going to be my focus for the short term until potentially something else big comes along. With respect to why, a lot of people may wonder, why was he paid? To silence by the government or whatever? No, has nothing to do with that at all. I wish actually. I was looking for my ScarJo clone or my $10 million that would get deposited, but no, sadly. I think if you listen to the letter as well, I think you'll realize at the end there's kind of an ominous statement it makes about how do you stop somebody that has unlimited power, that has complete control over the media, that can craft a narrative of events any way that they want, where they have everybody eating all the problem in their hands. And that's the world we live in. And they said that you talk about them, right? But the reality here is that they've done their job. Like if that's true and that statement is true, then that would implicate that potentially some of the podcasters that tried to debunk me and acted really weird, might have been getting a little whispers in their ears about how to treat me and things like that. It implicates that maybe some of the debunkers out there that have been pushing stuff are probably not as scrupulous as we imagine. But it also implicates just the society in general and not being able to accept this kind of stuff because we believe in the authority. And I've talked to some of the biggest podcasters, names that you would recognize, and I have reason to believe that they think that the videos are hoaxed or debunked based on some of the things that I just mentioned. And to me, that makes me think, well, what are we really hoping to get out of this at this point? right? The government's not going to make a statement because they can't, because they potentially can't lie. And if they were to come out and say we can't confirm or deny it, then everybody's going to say it must be true. So they can't say anything. They have to be quiet. They can't let the media touch it, because the more people that learn about it, even if a lot of people don't think it's real, it makes it too awkward for them to ignore. And then the thing is like, well, I wanted to get to the biggest podcasters that are out there to just, get to the biggest people and the biggest audience, and that point let it be. Well, if that can't happen either because it's too radioactive for them or whatever the case may be, then there really isn't much of a path forward. And at that point, then the answer is, especially because it's gotten so polarized. I mean, I had people in my Discord when I opened it up a couple days ago for like 12 hours straight, making new accounts, just posting brutal graphic gore and pornography and crazy weird letters and stuff that are like just complete psychotic behavior. Like these videos in the case have broken a lot of people's minds, like actually broken them. And I worry about people like that in general, in terms of like, are they even going to be okay, and stuff like that. So I think it's a good time to take a little bit of a break and step away from it and let these people, especially some of the haters out there, decompress a little and kind of come to their senses a little bit about, okay, yes, there's evidence out there. It's not going away. It's going to always be out there. And then to the people that might be disappointed with this, I would say that we have, in a very sense, accomplished something amazing, which is that we've put this whole narrative and theory and story out there into the world, where it's going to be very difficult on every anniversary and anytime anyone talks about the plane to ignore it, The same way I think there was this other narrative out there about the patent holders. Turns out that whole thing was false. None of the people, these patent holders, they weren't even on the plane, we found out. But it makes me wonder if those kinds of fake conspiracy theories get thrown out there so people don't look at the real ones,
Yeah.
So we've accomplished a lot related to this. And I think that retiring isn't the end, right? If there's a major break, if Edward C. Lynn comes out and all of a sudden we see in the news that there's this new whistleblower that's talking to the government, his name's Edward C. Lynn, you better believe I'm going to be all over that. And if AARO, who I've talked to, they respond back to me. This is actually one of the other big things in the case is AARO called me, or at least somebody claiming to be them. If it wasn't them, then they were impersonating a military officer, and I'm pretty sure that's a federal felony. They came back and called me, and I had put a case in when the AARO, this is the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, when their website first turned on. I put in the case. They finally called me back like 2 months later, had a great chat with the guy, talked to him for like an hour and a half, told him all about everything related to the case, the evidence. He had never seen the videos, told him where to go check them out on my website, on my YouTube or whatever. Told him that you can verify like whether or not the MQ-1C Gray Eagles have an aerial package that looks just like this, which I think they're going to find out they do. Told him go figure out what the satellite, sentient program with the SIBRS satellite video looks like. Go talk to the NRO. Supposedly he claims he can do that. And I said, okay, well, if you can validate that, then that's like pretty much proof the videos are real, because otherwise, who made these? Somebody who has classified information about how the satellite systems work, right? Like if it turns out that we guessed by deduction how SIBRS works with this computer program thing and why the clouds don't move, to me, that's absolute proof the videos are real, because that means that you would have to have military classified information just to fake them. So now it's a situation where either the government did it or they're just real, right? And that eliminates the whole Bitcoin billionaire and all these other absurd scenarios about, I would have just faked this. It was some random person who faked this in 5 hours, kind of stupid stuff. So that's, if that were to come out, if Arrow were to come out and for some reason and be able to confirm any of those aspects of it, then yeah, sure, I'll jump back into it. But the reality is I think we've exhausted like every angle with this case. We've looked at everything that's out there. There's only a couple more pieces I'm going to put out before I retire on March 8th. And then I hope that the science catches up. I don't know how long it'll take. It could take years is the reality of it. And when the science does catch up, I think people will look back at these videos and go, wait, we can teleport stuff? Wait, could those videos have really been what happened to the plane? Because they're never going to find this plane in the South Indian Ocean. Of that, I'm very, very confident. And the reason for that, because people may go, well, couldn't they have just ditched the plane down there afterwards to cover up the whole situation, right? Like, why not? Well, the reason for that is because they would have to, the black boxes, right? The black boxes are going to tell the true story of what happened to the plane. And those black boxes have SSD drives, which are going to last for decades. So even if the pingers don't work, those SSD drives are not going to be impacted. So the only way they could find the quote unquote a plane and keep the cover up is if they also had to falsify the black boxes entirely as well, which I don't know. If they falsified the Inmarsat data, maybe, but it seems like a stretch.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming back and chatting again and giving us an and you know, hopefully there's an update and we can talk about it again in a year or two when it happens, for sure. But thank you. This was awesome.
It was an awesome conversation. I appreciated definitely talking about the science aspects too. And I hope you guys will take this conversation forward with anyone else you talk about in the UFO realm and ask them about, like, do you really want disclosure? If disclosure means technology that can end our civilization, right?
Scary stuff.